Once upon a time, there was a little boy called the Silly Billy. It was the morning of October 31st, and Silly Billy woke up with a bounce. His tousled hair stuck out in every direction, and his mismatched socks peeked from under the duvet, left red, right blue, of course. He leapt out of bed, nearly tripping over Sulky the cat, who gave a grumpy meow and padded off with tail high and nose in the air. Billy skidded into the kitchen, where Mum was stirring porridge and Dad was trying to fix the toaster with a spoon. "It's Halloween," Billy announced, arms wide like a magician revealing a trick. Mum smiled. "We know, sweetheart. What's your plan?" Billy grinned. "I'm going to be the spookiest, silliest pumpkin in the whole village." Dad chuckled. "A spooky pumpkin? That's new." Billy nodded. "Not just spooky. Silly spooky. I need orange clothes, a green hat, and a face that glows." Sulky jumped onto the windowsill and blinked slowly, unimpressed. Mum wiped her hands and knelt beside Billy. "Let's see what we've got in the dressing-up box." They rummaged through the old wooden chest in the hallway. Out came a pirate hat, a tutu, a pair of fairy wings, and a wizard's cloak. No pumpkin bits. Billy frowned. Maybe Gran and Grandad have something." So off they went, Billy skipping, Mum pushing the pram with baby socks and snacks, and Dad carrying a bag of tools just in case. Sulky followed at a distance, tail flicking like a metronome. At Gran and Grandad's cottage, the garden was full of autumn leaves and the smell of cinnamon. Gran opened the door with flour on her nose. "Pumpkin emergency?" she asked. Billy nodded solemnly. "I need to become one." Grandad appeared behind her with a magnifying glass and a mug of tea. "We've got just the thing," he said, disappearing into the shed. 10 minutes later, Billy was wearing an old orange jumper, a green woolly hat with a pom-pom, and a belt made of string and jam jar lids. Gran painted rosy cheeks and a glowing grin on his face with safe, sparkly paint. Billy twirled. "I'm a silly spooky pumpkin." Everyone clapped. Even Sulky gave a slow blink of approval. As they walked home, Billy imagined all the adventures his pumpkin self would have, spooky ones, silly ones, and maybe even a few with jam jars that glowed in the dark. Tomorrow would be November, but today was Halloween, and Silly Billy was ready. Back home, Silly Billy was bursting with pumpkin energy. He twirled into the living room, arms stretched like leafy vines. "We need decorations," he declared. "Spooky ones. Silly ones. Sparkly ones." Mum smiled from the sofa, folding laundry. "Let's keep it friendless spooky, okay?" Billy nodded. "No scary skeletons. Just giggly ghosts and dancing bats." Dad appeared from the hallway with a box labeled Halloweenish. Inside were old paper lanterns, tangled fairy lights, and a rubber spider that made Billy squeal with delight. Sulky the cat sniffed the spider, then batted it under the armchair. Billy got to work. He taped googly eyes onto oranges, turned toilet rolls into fluttery ghosts, and hung socks from the ceiling like spooky bunting. "Soccer lanterns," he announced proudly. Mum brought out a string of pumpkin-shaped lights. "These still work," she said, plugging them in. They flickered once, then glowed a warm orange. Billy clapped. "Perfect." Dad helped hang them around the window, while Billy arranged his sock ghosts on the mantelpiece. Sulky watched from the windowsill, tail twitching with mild disapproval. Outside, the garden rustled with autumn wind. Billy peeked through the glass. "We need something out there too." So they bundled up in jumpers and scarves and headed into the garden. Billy gathered leaves, twigs, and conkers. Dad brought out a rake and made a big pile of crunchy leaves. "Leaf monster!" Billy shouted, diving in. They built a scarecrowish figure using Mum's old hat, Dad's gardening gloves, and Billy's spare dungarees. Its face was a paper plate with a painted grin. "Meet Mr. Leafy," Billy said. "He guards the pumpkins." Mum added a lantern beside him, and Gran popped by with a tray of warm apple slices. "Decorating day?" she asked. Billy nodded. "It's the best day ever." As the sun dipped low, the garden glowed with soft lights and silly shapes. Inside, the living room was a patchwork of giggles and googly eyes. Sulky curled up on the rug, finally accepting the chaos. By mid-afternoon, the village was buzzing. Leaves danced along the pavements, and windows twinkled with pumpkin lights and paper bats. Silly Billy stood at the front gate, bouncing on his toes. His orange jumper was tucked in, his green hat was snug, and his jam jar belt clinked with every step. Mum handed him a little cloth bag. "For sweets," she said. "And remember, polite knocks, big smiles." Dad gave him a wink. "And no tricking the vicar again." Billy giggled. "That was last year." Sulky the cat watched from the windowsill, unimpressed by the excitement. Billy waved. "Wish me luck." The village parade was starting at the duck pond. Children gathered in costumes, witches with stripy tights, tiny ghosts with pillowcase sheets, and one very serious robot made from cereal boxes. Billy spotted his best friend, Alfie, dressed as a jellybean. "You look delicious," Billy shouted. Alfie grinned. "You look like a vegetable." They joined the parade, which was really just a cheerful walk around the village green. Parents waved from doorsteps, and Gran handed out homemade biscuits shaped like stars. Grandad stood beside her, offering riddles instead of sweets. "What has hands but no arms?" he asked. Billy shouted, "A clock," and earned a biscuit with extra jam. As they passed the old bookshop, something curious happened. A shadow flickered behind the window, not spooky, just odd. Billy paused. "Did you see that?" Alfie shrugged. "Probably a cat." But Sulky was still at home, and this shadow had a hat. Billy tiptoed closer. The shop was closed, but a sign in the window read, "Beware the Whispering Witch." Billy gasped. "A real witch?" Alfie laughed. "It's just a Halloween joke." But Billy wasn't so sure. He pressed his nose to the glass. Inside, rows of dusty books lined the shelves, and a broom leaned against the counter. A faint giggle echoed from somewhere deep inside. Billy stepped back. "We'll come back later." The parade moved on, and Billy's bag began to fill with sweets, biscuits, and one slightly squashed banana. He waved at neighbors, twirled for Gran, and even gave Sulky a treat when they passed home again. But his mind kept drifting back to the bookshop. Who was the Whispering Witch? And why did her broom look like it had been used that morning? The morning after Halloween, Silly Billy woke up with a mission. He pulled on his dungarees, grabbed his jam jar belt, and tiptoed past Sulky, who was curled up in a sunbeam. "I'm going to find the Whispering Witch," Billy whispered. Mum raised an eyebrow over her tea. "You mean the bookshop?" Billy nodded. There was a broom. And a giggle. And a sign. Dad chuckled. Sounds like a story waiting to happen. Billy packed his cloth sweet bag, now filled with a torch, a biscuit, and a magnifying glass borrowed from Grandad. "Just in case," he said. The village was quiet, leaves rustling like secrets. Billy reached the bookshop and peered through the window. The sign still hung there, "Beware the Whispering Witch." But today, the door was open. He stepped inside. The shop smelled of old paper and cinnamon. Shelves towered like trees, and books whispered as he passed. "Hello?" Billy called. A voice replied, soft and cheerful. "Looking for something magical?" Billy turned. Behind the counter stood a woman with silver-streaked hair, a green scarf, and twinkling eyes. "I'm Mrs. Widdershins," she said. "And you must be Silly Billy." Billy blinked. "How do you know?" She smiled. Word travels fast in small villages. Especially when someone builds a sock ghost army. Billy giggled. "Are you the witch?" Mrs. Widdershins winked. "Only on Tuesdays." She led him to a corner filled with books about potions, pumpkins, and peculiar pets. "This one's about a cat who turns into a teapot," she said, handing him a book with a grumpy black feline on the cover. Billy gasped. "Just like Sulky." They sat on a squashy armchair and read stories about broomstick races and invisible jam. Mrs. Widdershins showed him a drawer full of glowing bookmarks and a cupboard that smelled like marshmallows. Magic, she said, is mostly imagination. Billy nodded. And biscuits. Before he left, she gave him a tiny notebook. For your own stories, she said. Write down the silly ones. They're the best kind. Billy skipped home, notebook clutched tight. Sulky blinked at him, unimpressed. You'll never believe what I saw, Billy whispered. Sulky yawned. Billy opened the notebook and wrote, Scene 1, The Whispering Witch. And just like that, a new adventure began. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind where the windows fog up and the garden turns to puddles. Silly Billy sat cross-legged on the living room rug, notebook open, pencil in hand. Sulky the cat snoozed nearby, tail twitching with dreams of tuna. Billy tapped his chin. Every good story needs a hero, he whispered. And a mystery. And biscuits. He scribbled the title, The Whispering Witch and the Jam Jar Belt. Mum peeked in from the kitchen, holding a tray of warm crumpets. Writing your own tale. Billy nodded. It's about me. And Mrs. Widdershins. And maybe a flying sock. Dad wandered past with a screwdriver and a half-mended lamp. Don't forget the cat, he said. Billy grinned. Sulky's the sidekick. Grumpy but brave. He began to write, Once upon a time, in a village full of ducks and biscuits, there lived a boy named Billy. He wore mismatched socks and carried a belt made of jam jars. One day, he discovered a whispering witch who lived in a bookshop and knew the secret of glowing toast. Billy paused. Does toast glow? Mum laughed. Only if you leave it in too long. Billy added a note, toast equals maybe magical. He drew pictures in the margins, a broomstick shaped like a spoon, a cat with a cape, and a sock ghost doing a dance. Sulky opened one eye, unimpressed. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the windows. Inside, the house was warm and full of quiet magic. Billy wrote about a secret cupboard that led to a world of floating teacups and talking pumpkins. He gave Grandad a role as the keeper of riddles and Gran as the biscuit wizard. He wrote until his fingers smudged the page and his pencil wore down to a nub. Then he read it aloud to Mum, Dad, and Sulky, who blinked slowly, which Billy took as applause. Mum clapped. That's a wonderful start. Dad nodded. You've got the storytelling bug. Billy beamed. Tomorrow, I'll write chapter 2. As the rain turned to mist and the crumpets disappeared, Billy curled up with his notebook beside Sulky. The story wasn't finished, but it was alive, full of socks, spells, and silly surprises. And in Billy's world, that was the best kind of magic. The rain had stopped, leaving behind puddles that sparkled like tiny lakes. Silly Billy stood at the back door, notebook in hand, boots on feet, and Sulky trailing behind like a reluctant shadow. I need inspiration, Billy said. Real-life adventure. With mud. Mum handed him a raincoat. Just don't turn the garden into a swamp. Billy grinned. Only a magical one. Outside, the garden was a patchwork of soggy leaves, crooked stepping stones, and one very damp scarecrow named Mr. Leafy. Billy tiptoed past the flower beds, notebook tucked under his arm, and stopped beside the old apple tree. This, he whispered, is where the portal goes. He drew a circle in the mud with a stick. Portal to the land of socks and spells. Sulky sat nearby, unimpressed but curious. Billy opened his notebook and scribbled, Chapter 2, Billy discovers a portal in the garden. It smells like biscuits and glows when you sing to it. He sang a wobbly tune about jam and socks. Nothing happened. Then Grandad appeared at the fence, holding a magnifying glass. Looking for wormholes? Billy nodded. Or sock holes? Grandad chuckled. Try the compost heap. That's where all the mysteries go. Billy ran over and poked the compost with a stick. A cloud of steam puffed out, and something shiny glinted inside, a spoon, maybe, or a magical teacup. He gasped. Treasure! Sulky sniffed it and sneezed. Billy added a new line to his story. Billy finds a magical spoon that belonged to the Whispering Witch. It stirs spells and soup. He twirled the spoon in the air. I hereby declare this garden officially enchanted. Just then, Gran arrived with a basket of knitted pumpkins. For your portal, she said with a wink. Billy arranged them around the muddy circle. Now it's real. He sat cross-legged beside it, notebook open, spoon in hand, and began to write. Billy stepped into the portal and found a world where cats wore crowns, socks danced on their own, and every puddle led to a biscuit shop. Sulky blinked slowly, as if considering the crown idea. As the sun peeked through the clouds, Billy looked around, muddy boots, glowing puddles, and a spoon that might be magical. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a story waiting to be told. It was Sunday afternoon, and the house smelled of cinnamon toast and warm socks. Silly Billy sat on the living room rug, notebook in hand, surrounded by cushions and crumbs. Mum was knitting something mysterious, Dad was tinkering with a squeaky slipper, and Sulky was curled up in the laundry basket, pretending not to listen. Billy cleared his throat. I'm ready to read chapter 3. Mum smiled. We're all ears. Dad nodded. Even Sulky's twitching. Billy opened his notebook and began. Billy stepped through the garden portal and landed in Socktopia, a land ruled by Queen Gran and her biscuit army. The sky was made of jam, and the trees grew toast. Billy's jam jar belt glowed with magical light, and Sulky wore a crown made of sardines. Mum giggled. Queen Gran? Billy nodded. She knit spells. Gran, who had just arrived with a tray of lemon drizzle cake, bowed dramatically. Your Majesty is honored. Billy continued. In Socktopia, Billy met the Whispering Witch again. She gave him a quest, find the lost sock of destiny. It was red. It was stripy. And it smelled faintly of adventure. Dad laughed. Sounds like one of mine. Billy paused. Then came the twist. He turned the page and read. Sulky the cat, who had always been grumpy and unimpressed, revealed his secret. He was actually Sir Sulkalot, guardian of the biscuit tin. He could talk, teleport, and do a very good impression of a kettle. Everyone burst out laughing. Sulky opened one eye, blinked slowly, and stretched with theatrical flair. Billy added, he also had a tail that pointed to treasure. Mum clapped. That's brilliant. Gran handed Billy a slice of cake. You've got the storytelling gift. Dad raised his slipper. To Sir Sulkalot. Billy beamed. Tomorrow, I'll write the final chapter. Sulky leapt from the basket and landed beside Billy's notebook. He sniffed it, then sat on it. Billy gasped. He's guarding it. Everyone laughed. The room glowed with warmth, cushions, crumbs, and the quiet magic of a shared story. Billy looked around. This, he whispered, is the best kind of adventure. And Sulky, in his own mysterious way, agreed. The house was quiet now. The pumpkin lights had been switched off, the sock ghosts gently swayed in the hallway, and Sulky the cat had claimed the warmest spot on the windowsill. Silly Billy was tucked up in bed, his mismatched socks poking out from under the duvet, left red, right blue, just as always. Mum sat beside him, brushing a curl from his forehead. Did you have a good Halloween, my silly spooky pumpkin? Billy nodded sleepily. It was the best. I was a pumpkin. I made decorations. I saw the Whispering Witch. I wrote a story. And Sulky wore a crown. Mum smiled. That's quite a lot for one day. Billy yawned. And I found a portal in the garden. Gran gave me knitted pumpkins. Grandad told riddles. And Dad fixed a slipper that squeaks like a mouse. She laughed softly. Sounds like magic. Billy turned to look at his notebook on the bedside table. I'm going to write more tomorrow. Maybe Sulky goes on a quest for the biscuit of destiny. Sulky blinked slowly from the windowsill, unimpressed but listening. Mum tucked the duvet around Billy's shoulders. You're a wonderful storyteller. Billy whispered, I think stories are like jam. you spread them, and they make everything better. Mum kissed his cheek. Sweet dreams, my jammy little pumpkin. As she tiptoed out, Billy stared at the ceiling, where faint shadows danced from the hallway lantern. He imagined Soctopia glowing in the moonlight, Queen Gran knitting spells, and Sir Sulcalot guarding the biscuit tin with noble grumpiness. Outside, the wind rustled the garden leaves. Inside, the house was wrapped in warmth, sleepy socks, soft stories, and the quiet hum of imagination. Billy closed his eyes, smiling. Tomorrow would be November. But tonight was still Halloween. And in his dreams, the pumpkins would dance.